So the subject that we're covering is, does the world need another podcast? And behind us, we'll explore the other insight of how do you stand out and making sense in a sea of audio. Let me introduce our panel, and I'll go from left to right, hopefully. So we've got next to me, Doug Downs. Doug's from Canada. Is that correct?
Yes,
Just checking. He hosts a very successful public relations podcast, which is huge. He's the founder of the podcast agency Stories and Strategies. So he's an advisor. About 25 are active at the moment.
25 active, about 70-ish on the history of the company.
And can I just say, they all come out on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
So we have no idea how Doug does it. It's got clients globally, Canada, mainly in the US, but also Egypt. And the reasons Doug is over here, because you need some in the UK.
Yes,
right.
We don't have any in the UK.
Right. Around the clients like L'Oreal, Remax, and the government of Ontario. Okay. Then we have Mark Borkowski, who's much older in his picture. You can see behind.
2 years old. Come on.
Mark is. I know Mark very well, but if you're from the UK, you see Mark all the time on the BBC, Channel 4, in the newspapers, because basically he's their go-to man. There's been a celebrity or crisis, and that's a very busy job in your spare time. He spent 40 years inside the machinery of fame, brand, and crisis. He's the founder of Borkowski PR. He advises companies, founders, and corporate media institutions on reputation under pressure. We had a call last week where his conversations, he's got a client that's just been sued for 50 million. He's trying to keep it out of the paper. He's the author of a book called The Fame Formula, which has now become a podcast to the same name. And his agency produces also podcasts for someone called Dr. Luz Newson, who is the lady who's like made the menopause and the issues of the menopause famous. And then something else called Fergun, which is, I believe, a quantum.
The number one podcast when you're into quantum financing.
Yeah, there you go. At Figum, and he also is setting up a production facility to democratize, I would say, podcasting on the basis of allowing more people access to it who can't afford it to go to do it. Okay, and then we have the delightful Miranda, who's delighted I've stopped calling her Amanda. Miranda has spent 25 years at the top of creative communication industry. That means from a job point of view and experience point, she's advised brands, CEOs, all sorts of people. She ran Brooklyn Brothers, an ad agency specializing in brand and entertainment, which was recognized by being one among the bravest by Contagious. She was MD at Edelman brand. And in the world where everybody is like it's Spartacus, isn't it? Everybody's a storyteller these days, a cultural storyteller, and she can claim it because she's done things like Virgin Atlantic Astronauts in New York, Bear Grylls in Welsh Rivers, and Gurinder Chadha on Primrose Hill at the Sunset. Worked for all sorts of international brands, Jaguar Land Rover, L'Oreal, and she's now decided, there's two of them here, to do her own podcast, which we'll touch on later, called Bardette. And it's not a niche, and it's conversations with, I think the phrase is remarkable women, which there are a lot of. People with brain cells who've got an opinion. And she's also a member of Albright Women in PR. And as Miranda pointed out, as you'll notice, there's 3 men and 1 woman, which is typical of the world of marketing and everything else and to go through. And we should look to change that, I hope. Right. For your benefit, I'm Mark Palmer. I work with David on a consultancy called Catalyst, where we do like human intelligence working with people, pop-ups, things like that. And I also, on my own part, run a change and branding consultancy called Maverick Planet. I'm not a podcaster, but I do have a book that came out. So I've learned a lot about I wish I knew. And I just came out in a podcast last week. So it's like a massively interesting learning experience for me. So I'm going to do all my naivety to it. So let's get going. We'll see over here, you've got the rest of politics, with bizarrely a cabinet minister is now doing live reads for a VPN. There isn't a media owner or an organization that isn't interested in podcasts, or a politician or everybody else in it. If you're a brand CEO, founder, author, politician, it's got to be on your radar. And so you can't afford to engage in it. And so we're going to be discussing that, okay, in terms of what to do. And I'll start with Doug. Right. You've been doing podcasts for some time, 25 on the go, all on a Tuesday? Yeah.
Tuesday, yeah.
Why should a brand, company, or person still do a pod? Given that's what you largely do, why should they still do podcasts? Why should they just not go, it's too many, it's too busy, it's too noisy?
It's emerging as one of the best ways to build trust for your brand, and trust seems to be the cornerstone for what we're looking for increasingly as AI creeps its way into our lives more and more. When you think about it, nobody is spending more than a minute with any of your content, not on social media, not your newsletter, probably not your YouTube videos. If you can get 2 or 3 minutes of a view on YouTube, that's actually not bad. Sometimes you go a little longer. Audio, though, the average consumption is somewhere around 65 to 70% of your episode. So on a 30-minute episode, they're soaking in about 25 minutes. So I don't even think downloads are the main way to measure the success of a podcast. I think it's time spent. And in fact, you can crack a calculation where from that episode, how long did people listen? How many social media posts did you put out? Did you write a couple of newsletters from it? All this or put up a YouTube video, all this content you can generate from one episode. How much time was spent as a result of that episode? And then calculate how much did we spend making the episode? And the cost will come out to a couple of pounds per minute. It really isn't very expensive when you think about it. So for brands, this is the opportunity, and we're in the early pioneering days.
This is early, you think, 4
We're very early. We're roughly where the internet was in 1999. The infrastructure is almost there. It's not even there yet as video becomes more prominent and HLS becomes more prominent with Apple. So I can toggle back and forth between audio and video. The infrastructure's almost there. The business development opportunities are just starting to show themselves, and the leaders within the industry are just starting to creep up. We're back in 99 for the website in terms of development.
Okay. Mark, do you think the world needs another podcast? Obviously you do, because you've got one. But why does the world need another podcast, or why doesn't it?
I was very interested in those statistics, which proves my point that actually when I came here, I saw this rat running across the road. And then I thought, I looked up and went to ChatGPT and I said, is it true that we're in London, we're 6 foot near a rat? And it came back, said, no, it's not true. Actually, we're 6 foot nearest to a podcaster. There are more podcasters than there are rats in London. Everybody's got a
Is that true?
It's true. There's a great Insta sketch about that, by the way. But licking some material. But the bottom line is that you touched on it, storytelling, brand storytelling has been something we've all been obsessed about for so many years. Absolutely, it has to be true. Absolutely, it has to be authentic. But there's a lot of crap out there in terms of what people and brands think they want to connect with. What I'm interested in, after being a publicist who had to struggle with journalists over the years, particularly 20, 30 years ago, where your client was 1 inch away from being destroyed by a tabloid newspaper. I had a very famous editor, Kelvin McKenzie, used to call me up every week, would say, I'm going to fuck your client this weekend, Mark. And there's nothing you can do about it. We just don't like him. He's too prevalent. So I've always been interested in taking control. And I think that's partly what podcasting is all about, is that people can actually tell their stories in an authentic, trustful way, but in which way they're doing it. You do sometimes have a challenge. A lot of the work we're doing at the moment is through legacy work, where people have reached a point in their careers, in their business or whatever, that they would normally have turned to writing a book or whatever, but they want to capture everything in terms of film and audio. And they can break that up in whichever way they want. They could turn it into an audio book, or they can turn it into a series. They could turn it into sound bites, but also they take control of their story. So I think that you do have to challenge, in a sense, to make stuff interesting, because if it's not interesting, no one's going to connect. And I think, I always believe that if you're going to create something, will people miss it when it's gone? And that's the sort of drug of a great podcast. There are certain podcasts I'm connected to because they deliver. Every day needs to be a school day. We have to be curious after our curious sated. And some of the great podcasts are telling me stuff I didn't know. And I think that all that fits into it, but actually brand storytelling through podcasts can also be mind-numbingly bizarre. And good luck to the producers who've snared that budget, to make that podcast much more interesting. Actually, is the sort of work that people are doing to connect. I think that we know the brands that are doing it because we're talking about it, but there's also a lot of people out there doing stuff that no one's talking about, and yet they're walking away, and hence that's why people flip so quickly away from it, because they're not connected. They don't have that emotional connection. And I think that's where PR folk have always been the greatest what they do, because they've always grabbed technology of the age. Whatever the medium was being used, whether it's a technological sort of equivalent of the mail merge through to radio, through to TV, whatever, publicists, PR people were there first using it. And I think this is where Doug comes in correctly to say that we can see the power of this before other competitors for that chunk of money.
Miranda, your view, let's do first off, after the first question, why do you think we need another podcast? Then we'll talk about yours.
So I definitely think there is room for more, but I'll break down why. Obviously, there's loads out there, but as you said, there's this statistic. People start, they have good intention, and then after 3 episodes, it's called pod fade, as Doug will know. There's this terminology. There's 35 or 45% AI pod slop, so probably no one's listening to that. So I think amongst the pool of genuinely interesting podcasts, there's room for more, because the direction I come at it is those that are cutting through have big money behind them, like Elizabeth Day, How to Fail. I do love it, but it's got Sony behind it, so she can get the distribution so it gets on your radar. Why I love podcasts, apart from the valid reasons you two have said that I know they do for clients, that they're the broadcast media du jour, is it's very egalitarian, I think. I love what you're talking about, this studio to help people who are bootstrapping. I will be bootstrapping, but I think that anyone can do it, and it no longer is gatekept by the people that somebody somewhere have said, oh, you're a celebrity, you're an authority, and nobody else gets a look in, because there are loads of interesting people who are not celebrities, who are not necessarily famous, but they have expertise in a niche that would be mentally inspiring and brain food for you to find out about. The other way I look at it is for women. There are stats everywhere. They're like VC funded in women is some tiny single-digit percentage. 4%. And I think that if you look at, I think it's a little bit out of date now, but there was a stat from maybe a year or two ago that only 11% of hosts and producers are female. I think that's gone up a little bit, but in something like business and tech, I think it's 12-1 male hosts to female. So I think there's room for a few more female-focused ones. And I think it can do a job if done well for a brand or a CEO representing a brand, but it's really important it's not boring, to Mark's point. And I think what you have to do is not just think form over content. It's the other way around. Anyone with a budget, let's say a bank, and I'm not going to drop brand names, could put loads of money behind a flash studio, get 2 senior people, and they could just talk at each other about their industry, and it would not make a very interesting podcast. And I think it comes back to the way creative agencies work, which is you need to lean into what people are interested in culture, if you're a brand, and be adjacent to it, rather than thinking anyone's going to care hearing you bang on about your brand for an hour. That's my short answer.
That's brilliant. Doug, do you want to come back?
Can I say so? Just to defend Elizabeth Day, because I've known Elizabeth Day for 20 years. She started that out of pain and passion, and started by herself, no resources, using a network, and she has grown it into a significant podcast because it's still as compelling as her first one. But she started with nothing. She was through a turmoil she was going in her life and wanted to find other people who had failed. And I think it fitted that.
Interesting, yeah.
Fitted that.
I'll do one because then I'll come back to Doug. So the other side of this is, I mean, I'm getting it. So you're just saying passion projects, do something that people want, is find an area. If you do something interesting, you'll find an audience. And, you know, but the other side of it is there is a large number of crap. You've just mentioned there are corporates spending a fortune doing something. We do have a world where there might be really brilliant people doing stuff. Two questions. Why are people doing the crap on a business level with budget? And what should people doing differently? That's the first question. And then the second question, how do we break out of it so that you don't just get squashed by the machine? To your point, if someone's got that big and they can pay to be Spotified, what's to stop making it so hard for people to get through, even though the best intention is brilliant?
So I would say broadly, not being Doug, a podcast expert that does it, you know, for his living. If you have a guest format, obviously you want to mine their audience. They don't have to be famous, but if they've got some infamy, they've got socials, they've got followers. I think you should go video from the get-go, because you then have the ability to have cut downs to promote on social, to hook people in, because you won't be discovered by someone going on to Spotify going, oh, I'll decide to find a new podcast. You'll drag your listeners from somewhere else. And so having that content is the way you do it. I agree with Doug that then once you've pulled them in, they're more likely to just listen to the audio for longer. So that's me answering your second point.
On that bit. So just in case you're not aware, there was various stats on where do people go the most for podcasts. A lot of people and a lot of news will say it's now predominantly YouTube. Doug, your view on this?
Okay, so first off, Oxfam's 2025 report says it's Spotify, and then BBC Sounds, and then YouTube. But you'll easily Google studies that say YouTube is number one. The key difference is YouTube is probably number one for people. It's the second biggest search engine in the world, but habitually people don't watch videos for very long. They'll find you, it's discoverability on YouTube, but then they'll go to Spotify or BBC Sounds or Apple or Overcast or Pocket Cast, whatever their audio habit is, and that's where they'll spend time with you. YouTube is not number one for time spent on your podcast. It probably is number one for time spent overall by people, because all we're doing these days is scrolling. And I wanted to circle back to more the numbers. On your phone, if you go to podcastindex.org, it will show you how many podcasts are registered through Podcast Index. Spotify says there are 7 million podcasts. There probably are. They're probably right. Doesn't matter where you register your podcast. Some put it through the index, some don't. But of that 4.5 million, scroll down to the subheadline. In the last 30 days, barely 350,000 have published a new episode. Over the last 90 days, 450,000. That's it. That's this sea of audio that we're talking about. The podcast landscape is full of Walking Dead zombies, ghost ships on that sea of audio. You're not battling with them. Now, some of them are going to be series, right? And I'm all for publishing a temporary series, but the ongoing episodes, we're talking 350,000 every month.
Well, I'm going to pretend like I've just hired you for my book. Okay. I want to do a podcast. What would you tell me to do? Miranda would say you must video it because I'll get my discovery within my network.
First, ask you, Mark, why do you want to do a podcast?
Because I'm quite a sad person, and I've always late to every party. So why not be late to podcasting?
Why would your audience be interested in your sadness? Do they want to bond with it?
Because I'm brilliantly entertaining and witty, and who wouldn't want that?
Problem.
Yeah.
Okay. And you have some data that tells me,
and I'm reasonably good at marketing and stuff like that, and I've got some nice stories about that might be vaguely entertaining and some of it quite scary.
What is the symptom that you're trying to solve for your listeners? How are you going to help them with their cure?
removing the bullshit that exists within marketing.
Okay.
That's my mission.
Okay. And for you, how are you going to measure success of your podcast? What are the numbers that are going to tell you you're achieving your goal?
If I'm honest, it wouldn't be the numbers. It would be the occasional gig. It would be earning enough money so I don't have work, and then somebody inviting me to a really nice conference in a very exotic place.
Cool. Do you have follow-up mechanisms to your podcast where you can steer them to your academy or your master class? You do have a book. You can drive them to your book. But what are the follow-ups to it? Because a podcast thrives in the middle of the funnel, not at the bottom of the funnel.
That's the problem. I don't have the funnel.
Okay. Well, we'll work on your funnel and then you should do your podcast, because otherwise it's just a voice and it ends up being what Mark has described. It's just another voice that's out there. We need to steer them somewhere. So we're measuring success.
You touched on something that is quite interesting. I don't think it's just about podcast. I think we have a terrible habit of talking to ourselves about ourselves. We're in bubbles. The biggest bubble, the biggest money-making bubble on the planet, and is Cannes Lion. I mean, really, it stays within that place where people are spending a lot of money to have a great time, to tell you, for networks, to offices, to tell bigger network offices they're doing great work. And I think that's when we touched on banking. There's nothing better than getting two people talking about each other in their bubble, and then for whoever has produced that to then blind people with statistics that actually appeal to the ego of the person who's producing it. And that's why things fizzle out, because sooner or later truth rises to the top. Actually, there's 12 men, 3 cats and 2 dogs listening to it, because it isn't interesting. And believe it or not, we're interesting, you know. And I thought long and hard about the Fame Formula podcast I'm doing. And what I wanted to do, as I did with my book, I wanted to bring people out who'd never been talked about. This pre-Google, many of the great Hollywood publicists weren't even found on Google. I found a generation of people getting themselves power through Google who just were not paying homage to people who'd gone before. And what I'm fascinated with, and we're seeing it last night with the whole fuss around, rightly so, this horrendous stories around Married at First Sight, is that fame is toxic. And that's what my Fame Formula is about. I'm getting people to about women. I've got Lynn Franks my next broadcast, talking about her own fame and how she dealt with it, how she sold a company, but also what Absolutely Fabulous did to her and how that sort of partly destroyed her reputation. And I think that it's not about people bigging up what they've achieved and how big the network is, but what actually is interesting, because ultimately podcasts work because you and I and everybody in this room tell somebody about a podcast that they enjoy. Word of mouth is the most potent engine to drive it. And when I kicked off the podcast, I was very cynical. Who in my network did I know that had the biggest following? Anthony Scaramucci, who gave me a huge lift to kick it off, because I wanted to know what it was like when he was suffered the slings and arrows of being Trump's comms person for 12 days. And of course, he gave me some great sound bites, but he also promoted across all his channels. I had a huge lift for the first one, but had to deliver on the second. And now, after delivering on the second, I've got to deliver on the third, the fourth, and fifth. So you keep.
So can I ask a practical question? Not that I'm doing a podcast. Practically, because Doug and I were talking about this earlier, you've got the reality of, if you're all running podcasts, you've got people to get on. Yeah, you're all doing podcasts where you're interviewing people. How do you get them? Do they come to you? What's the practicalities of how do you choose? How do you pick? What do you get? Now, I can get where you start, and you know, how are you going to go about? What have you done?
I'll have to kind of give a preamble first. So the podcast I haven't yet launched, even though I'm on a panel about podcasting, is going to be conversations with remarkable women. It's not going to be about PR or marketing or advertising or my career niche. It's not going to have a niche, and I'm not trying to make money and feed a funnel. So in a way, I think that gives some freedom. To begin with, I'll be like the Rick Rubin of my podcast. I'll be deciding, I think you're really interesting. You're outside my world. You have a remarkable story. I know it. I'll share it on this platform, mostly because I think there could be more stories about amazing women, not because they've broken boundaries and they're a CEO, and not because, oh, women need, their voices. Just some great women and interesting ones outside of my day to day. So to the point Mark says, I think, we all like to learn about things we don't know about. So if in half an hour you can hear from somebody who is, a scientist or saving the planet or a sci-fi writer or whatever it may be, a fine artist, that to me would be interesting and I would find it interesting. So how have I found them? How has this idea of Bardette come about? In my work, when you work in marketing, advertising, PR, you get clients from lots of different sectors. So one week you'll be doing a tech client and the next week you'll be doing a soft drink and so on. And then you're not only bouncing between sectors, you come up with these creative ideas that take you down further rabbit holes and you become these micro experts over 20 years. So with Samsung, I did a Tech for Good project and ended up discovering this group of all female rangers in Africa that stopped poaching without using guns, called the Black Mambas. And I wouldn't have known about them. And that was bloody amazing. Or you said it at the start, I ended up filming Gurinder Chadha talking about her career of being, one of the few Asian female directors, producers of films that cut through in her house in Primrose Hill for an hour, and only 60 seconds of that ended up in the campaign for a beauty brand. And she had an amazing story.
So
Where did I get them from?
Yeah, and then where?
To begin with, I've got them from meeting them, seeing them talk, discovering them in my own life. What I'd hope is, a bit like Mark, after a while, if people listen, I'd like it to be collaborative. You suggested someone to me. Almost anyone I tell says, I know an amazing woman. And then it becomes its own momentum and it becomes a community, to your point.
I'm going to go to Doug. You're doing this, I'm not saying at scale, that's not what I'm meaning. You're doing this with lots and lots of different people all the time, 20. So you must have, I don't know, you imagine the Excel to die for, combined with, well, I said to Doug earlier, what's the biggest mistake? Have you ever put the wrong guest on the wrong podcast? And Doug said he hasn't done that,
No.
but he has forgot to turn the sound on.
We forgot to hit record. Yeah, a long time
So
ago.
how do you do it? I mean, Joe, given you, I'm not saying you industrialize, but you've got different people with different briefs.
Right.
And how do you advise them?
So we attend each recording with each client. That's our preference. And at the end of the recording is our time to spend together to talk about the next month, 2 months of the podcast and plan episodes. And that's where we conceptualize with them what are the next episodes that we're going to be publishing. And we actually deliberately target away from the who or whom. We're not looking for the people that we want on the podcast. We're looking for the stories and then who can tell the stories. And it's really important to us that it's in that sequence. And some clients fight that, especially the ones in financial services are insistent we put the CEO of this, that, and the other thing, and everybody will come and everybody will listen to it. We'll go 2 hours long and they'll listen to all of it. And the data just doesn't back it up. Not even close. They don't get the downloads. They don't get the retention rate. Look for the stories. So that's how we approach it.
Do you want to do the one we chat about your realtor? I mean, I think it's really interesting that the people get obsessed with what I should do in my area. This whole conversation about what's a brand and how you bring the brand to life.
About 2 years ago, we were approached by a realtor in a fairly small Canadian community, a community of about 30,000 people, just south of the big city. And the psychographic to the people who live in that town/city is they're not the big city. They appreciate that. They like it. And he said he wanted to do a real estate podcast because his goal was he wants to sell more homes. And by that point, we'd already done lots of real estate podcasts, and we were ultimately nicely saying, no, we weren't going to do it. And we eventually pitched him on doing a podcast that doesn't talk about real estate at all. All you're talking about is your community. And we agreed that there could be a little tagline at the beginning and at the end with a different voice saying, brought to you by Carlin Lutzer Real Estate. So it feels like a sponsorship to the listener. And that was key because listeners actually really approve of sponsors in podcasts. The whole, okay, this wouldn't be happening without the that made sense, and it's disassociated in its presentation. Carlin hit 1,000 downloads in about 3 months, which is terrific for a new podcast. He interviewed the kid in his basement in the community who has snakes. He interviewed the local mayor. He interviewed the butcher shop owner. He interviewed the baseball team manager, the mascot, the beer hawker at the local, the guy who yells, "Get your beer." He interviewed him on his pad. Perfect community stuff. He hit 10,000 downloads within a year. He's now sold a $2 million house. He has people who come to his open houses only to meet him. They're not in the market. They just want to meet Carlin and get his card. He hosts Rotary Club events. He MCs and sings on stage, and he doesn't sing, trust me. And his website visits have quadrupled.
So, can I so one of the things we're also chatting about is that people have got this mistake of seeing podcasts as podcasts. So an agency might be buying slots in it, or I'm using it as an additional piece of PR. And therefore, what Mark was saying, one of the benefits, your podcast is not just yes, you like thing. It's a business. It's got a business benefit.
It absolutely does, because it builds trust.
Yeah, of course. I want to. I've always been fascinated by characters. Actually, it's been a bit of an Achilles heel to me. I've called myself an adventure capitalist, really, because I love people who tell stories. And I've had some pretty shaggy dog clients over the years, but they're incredibly entertaining, and probably too entertaining, and probably not commercially worth doing. I remember once I had a phone call from a bank manager in Barclays in Carmarthen. And he called me up and said, we are renovating the whole building and we found a safety deposit box. And in the safety deposit box, he was convinced he had the Holy Grail. Would I come down and visit him? And I was literally getting my coat out and running out.
Was it Sean Connery or Harrison Ford?
And then someone stopped me and said, where are you going, Mark? I said, well, I'm going to Carmarthen. This bank manager's got the Holy Grail. He said, but we've got to do the rehearsal. We've got the Bisto pitch tomorrow. So it was like gravy granules and a retainer or the bank manager. But sometimes you have to grab hold of those. And that's exactly what Doug is saying. You can see why that podcast works. Totally get it. Because it's about a community. It's about real authentic stories. It's about someone who gets it, who doesn't want to be.
The local newspaper is now signing an agreement with him that they're going to swap guests back and forth, right?
People want stories that actually matter. That's where you see these Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, in terms of local communities, are far greater. And sadly, the death of local newsprint has accelerated this, and that's why people are turning to podcasts.
Miranda, you got examples? What's your thought? Is that, we were chatting about this. People just see it's a podcast; they don't see it as a marketing idea, a brand idea. Are there examples that clients you've worked with, or people that you've seen in other ways that?
I think when a brand treats the creation of content themselves, and that can include podcasts, as making something other people want first, and their brand being adjacent, be it the idents of we're sponsoring this, be it whatever it is. So say Shopify, right? Shopify's podcast, I think, is about the SMEs, like, a solo person who's set up a cupcake shop. And it's interesting because it's personal anecdote. It's probably appealing to a lot of people who have a dream of doing something themselves one day, and get confidence and granularity and inspiration from seeing someone else who has, and they don't have to bang on about we integrated the Shopify, whatever it is, because it's obvious. They've deep dived into the really interesting bit of what they do, and they're not talking about the functionality of the tech, to keep people on the platform till they buy. So I think you have to approach storytelling like that. You have to listen to culture and real people in the community and find what they're interested in, and find an area that is adjacent to what your brand does, and not ram it down their throat.
Podcasts can also work for market research. And I'll give you an example. One of our clients is BioTalent Canada. They did 2 episodes back to back a couple of years ago now, this story. One was on growth strategies. The other was on market legalities. It's a BioTalent podcast. Both of them achieved basically the same number of downloads. but the consumption rate on the growth strategies episode was 85%. That's well above my 70% line, the industry average. The listenership rate on the market legalities was only 53%. So I take meaning from that. Number one, they both got the same downloads. These are both items of interest. These are well-placed episodes. We were confident we covered each topic appropriately. But clearly, the industry is focused on growth strategy at that point in time. BioTalent was able to change some of their newsletter content, some of how their CEO, Rob Templeton, delivered his information when he met with clients. It was an informative piece. So podcasts can also serve as market research.
Okay, I'm going to flip it now because I want to flip it to imagine you're advising a client or you have clients coming into each of you, and I'll do the negative side. So, Miranda, you've sort of like had brands, you've had clients, so you might have a CEO wanting to go on something. Where did they get it wrong? What would be your watch, and same with you, Mark, later? What's a watch app to go, I want to be, or what would you advise them? What's the classic do's and don'ts?
Well, I think you would start with meeting the person, the proposed person, and you
That's
very
sometimes
quickly
not
know whether they were somebody that should or shouldn't go on a podcast. Just because you're a CEO doesn't mean you're compelling or you can talk naturally under pressure, which you need to do, because it's not the same as being wheeled out where you control a short speech of sound bites. You know, it's long, it's meandering. You can get lulled into forgetting this will go live and there will be an audience, and you can think, oh, I'm just chatting to this person here, and your guard can drop. And then if
Prince
they
Andrew.
say something disastrous, that's not good. Or if they're too corporate and they sort of clam up and go, no comment, you can't go no comment on a podcast. So I think first you need to identify, is this the right person to represent the brand on podcasts? And then get them comfortable with what are the interesting ways to convey their key messages so they don't sound prescriptive and boring. The other thing is we do get CEOs who don't yet have a profile and want one, and that's fine, because if you humanize a CEO, that's good.
What's the benefit of humanizing? So, because good old days of media, that different media is different things. So if I just put, you have a multiple choice of what you do, but now you're going to go to podcast. What's human?
It's the same sort of human psychology as don't trust corporate brand, do trust another human. So I think there's an example where the guy that started Huel, that protein drink, had a bit of negative backlash to begin with. Oh, this is all what tech bros drink, and he was able to go on a podcast, and in that long format that you don't normally get and people don't normally listen to, he could explain how he began, how hard it was, that he started from scratch, and it did turn things around for the brand. So I think if you have the right person with something interesting to say, humanizing a CEO is one thing they can do. It's a platform for thought leadership. That's something else you can do on them. But I also think you need to start realistically. There are a lot of crappy podcasts you can pay to go on that no one will listen to and won't do anything. So there are a few things to consider.
Mark, you got any specifics that from your? You've probably got more interesting people with more interesting moments. Should I do or not do stuff?
I think two things. I think, if you're leading a company, I'm not talking about the entrepreneurial person sort of bootstrapping from the beginning, but I think there's a greater need for that person, particularly in the larger corporates, to actually be a communicator, and people are not. I remember Tony Hayworth, when the whole BP disaster happened, he couldn't communicate out. He was obviously got to the top of BP because he was brilliant at his job, not because he was a great communicator. So I think there's a greater need now. So therefore, when you're looking at whether a brand needs a podcast, you've got to think, where does it fit into the overall strategy?
Should Star go on a podcast?
It's not the bright shining thing that, because it's new and because lots of people are doing it or want to be on it, whether it's the right thing for you. And also going back here to that point about, is the person interesting? Is it interesting stories? Going back to Doug's point, I think that when we created the Dr. Louise Newsom Health podcast, it was out of a need that a male-dominated media had no inclination or understanding about menopause. So it became, it became a voice for really communicating to women, for women, the sort of great debate around hormones, and it's led now to 2 best-selling books. It's led to an offshoot of other things it's doing, and it's been something that she can hold on to against the attacks that she was getting from a lot of, how should we say, influencers in the menopause space.
I'm going to go to you in a second, Doug. Just have a think if anybody wants to ask any questions. So if you, after we do this bit, if anybody's got any questions, just shout them out next and we'll go through. So Doug, what do you do? What's the classic mistakes, or what do you do when someone comes to you for a contract or a client? What's the big mistakes that people make when they come to you?
What we do is that process that you and I did back and forth on why you want to have it, what you know about your listener base, and what are the measurables, so we can say this is succeeding. And we've talked, I think, a lot about how there's a tendency for brands to want to push information out, and that's one of the flaws. I think another is just plain structural, not understanding what makes for a compelling podcast, because ultimately it's the listener's behavior. They're on the Peloton, they're walking the dog, they're doing dishes, they're driving, they're walking from the tube. They're doing anything, and they've invited you into their habit. So we go by the philosophy: you have 0.3 seconds to earn 3 seconds, to earn 30 seconds, to earn 3 minutes, to earn 30 minutes. And you need to structure your episodes that way. And typically with one main narrative, that's the thing, the curiosity, the identity moment, the thing that compels you to push click and give it 3 seconds probably for technicals, 30 seconds for a compelling hook. Is this what I'm here for? And then there's another measurable at 3 minutes. We see lots of drop off within the first 3 minutes. You need to push them past that 3. Then you've probably got them for the 25. So one thing is to create a proper structure for your episodes, 1 narrative and 3 main chapters in a 30-minute episode, each one probably about 8 to 9 minutes long. Repeat your narrative, and then your calls to action.
Okay. Anybody got any questions? You'd like, you hold your hand out and say it, and I'll announce it back so we can capture it on the tape. How much preparation do you have to do a successful product, like one of the leading ones that has got all the celebrities and topical? And
so those are 2 different things. For most of our clients, I tell them it's 6 hours work overall, but most of that is on the production and redistribution side. They can get away with 2 hours on a 30-minute episode, but I need them to think about the episode. I need them to at least go through the discovery call that we've done, and I need them on the back end to help promote it. But for a podcast like what Goalhanger is doing, you're probably meeting over the course of 3 separate days to plan each episode, and you're going through it line by line on where we're going to go. Does that give you flexibility to move within this, what is supposed to be a casual discussion amongst friends? I would argue sometimes no. Sometimes the big ones overstructure themselves. And just to throw something in, Stephen Bartlett measures the CO2 levels in his studio just to see if the energy levels are dropping. That's how close attention he pays to his podcast.
Yeah. You've got a very big team too. I mean, like
massive team,
170 people on that podcast.
Anybody else got a question? Abba, please.
Point about planning the content. How much attention do you have to put to the actual edit? Because it seems to me the podcasts are often
So how much is the process and how much is the edit?
So Emily knows this, my business partner who looks after getting the editing done. We're often cutting 50, 60-minute episodes back to 28 minutes and 30 seconds. And that's typically going through the transcript and telling the client, here's what we suggest cutting. We think this flows, but it really is in the planning and the execution. If we're going to be taking something that big and cutting it back and suggesting this is an entire discussion, it has to be planned that way. And that's why 3 chapters, 3 distinct chapters in a 30-minute episode work. If you want to cut one of the chapters out, you plan it that way and you host it that way. So there are natural breaks. And I don't think a podcast is about just going on and on and on. We're really diligent on, if you're not getting 70% consumption rate, you're below our target. If you're scoring 55% consistently, It's too long, or the content is crap. It's one of the two.
So I'll just go back to this kind of thing. It's really important. The measurement thing. So media people historically, and I used to be one, you'd measure the audience, you'd measure reach, you may measure cut through, you measure, you used to buy attention first in break in a commercial. You thought how long people stay. Other people are measuring impressions. What else should people measuring? Because at the end of the day, if it's going back to a brand, I'm busy chasing an audience and I never actually engage anybody. What matters? What should people be measuring?
So first of all, clicks. Did downloads do count? A download under IAB 2.2 certification, a download is 60 seconds of a play. Okay, great. Same as on YouTube, it's 30 seconds of a view. Okay, terrific. A file was transferred. Somebody was there for 60 seconds. Great. The retention rate of 70% comes from a couple of different studies that suggest big podcasts like Pod Save America, for example, will average 63% consumption. Smaller independent podcasts score about 67%.
Can I stop you though? But if I'm a brand, right, all the numbers in the world, if at the end of the day I'm not changing perceptions or I'm not getting somebody over a period of time to like me or humanize me, isn't there a danger that we end up with a podcast world where everybody's chasing numbers and then the greater goal? We have this in advertising.
Oh, fair enough. Those are those extra KPIs. I was asking you, what are your specific KPIs so we know your podcast is on target? And you were saying if people are coming up to you.
Okay.
So that was fairly anecdotal and qualitative. So in your case, that's one of the measurements.
But it's interesting. Go back to that point about the sort of structure of newspapers, what's left of the old analog media world, is that my job now isn't to convince an editor, it's to actually manage an algorithm. Because if you go into any big newspaper to go mail online, these are battery hens, not journalists. And also they have huge screens which will give you heat on a particular story. The heat on that story is clicks coming through ads online. So therefore they'll keep that heat on those stories. So in my estimation, the quality of journalism is diminishing because you don't have a news editor, you have head of audience.
Right. So
therefore those metrics that you're talking about in positive are much more valuable than perhaps the news.
So that needs to be
deeper.
So that needs to be niche because just conscious of time to the bit that we haven't covered, which you mentioned earlier, pod slop. And right, so the other side of this is we now have literally AI generated podcast. There was something I read the other day that you can produce an episode via AI with an AI for $1. Okay. How big an issue? Particularly you're professional, you're all people who've got skills, who are doing stuff with bother and taste about, I'm hearing this. How are you bothered what proportion was it? 40, 50%? What is it? 45% of all podcasts are completely AI generated.
Doug will know loads more than me, but what I know is there are various reasons this happens. So probably one of the most famous is the Epstein Files podcast. And that actually is a bit of an outlier in that, suddenly the world had absolutely massive of information spewed out at it. Lots of people were interested and they couldn't physically trawl through it. So that's kind of a sensible use of AI. Some guy mashed up several LLMs and made something where it went through, it created a podcast system of it so you could listen and get the information that way. And he was able to do so many in such a short space of time. He could flood having like 2 episodes a day, and then that kind of frequency changes how you show up. So there is a game to play
#1 on Apple
with an algorithm. That doesn't mean everyone will want to listen to it forever. Then there are others where I think it's kind of like the dark arts of trying to steal attribution. Like it's like, oh, here's a podcast that exists that's in an area like menopause or something. I've got a menopause gummy I want to sell. So it's like affiliate marketing, a new dark art. I'll quickly make a sort of copycat podcast, be it copying the actual content from an existing podcast, copying some blog content somewhere, making something, and then think if you listen to a few minutes, you click out, there's buy a product here kind of thing. I feel personally, humans will prevail. You know, they'll listen to that and go, this is shit, and they'll leave. And that means that what will float higher up will be ones that are provably human, probably because there's video as well, so you can see them and you can verify they're real people. Probably because there is some interest, some rambling, not an hour's worth of rambling, so you get fed up, but something unexpected.
Okay, I'm going to get Doug on this. I'll be just to play devil's advocate on that. Advertising's gone through exactly the same thing. If you've seen what's happened on, let's take Meta. I think it's 16 billion that it makes on advertising for frauds and scams, which is funded by the advertising industry and various people. So just going back to the intent, and the advertising industry and all the publishers said the same. How worried are you, Doug, as someone who's living, and what's your worry? Where could it go next, and what's your big worry?
I'm really worried. There's a black hat here to be worn. It's a company called Inception Point AI, led by a lady named Janine Wright, who's at the podcast show, ironically defending herself.
She's in person. That's
in person.
A brave move.
Yeah, she's a courageous, very litigious soul. There, I don't know. I'll find out when I'm at the show. Her company at one point was publishing 3,000 episodes a week. All AI conceived, AI voiced, AI distributed, everything AI. They did an episode on the history of Sydney, Australia, at which point, inexplicably in the middle of it, the host starts talking about Sydney Sweeney. Her play seems to be to win what is now 10% of search, and that's ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude. And I mean, Google is still 80% of search. The other 10% is miscellaneous, like Bing, I suppose. But it's increasingly we're looking at generative AI and what GEO. That seems to be her play. So you're right. Once I hear that it's an AI podcast, I'm tuning out and I'm mad and I'm angry. But she's going to win the search by doing this. Thankfully, Apple and Spotify are introducing requirements to declare what percentage of your show was created through all aspects using AI. So even our clients, we're going to have to put a percentage down because we create episode arts. We use ChatGPT in the conception. We don't write a script for them, but we'll conceptualize what we can cover in the episode. We had Natasha on the show. On our podcast, we did a discovery call. I ran Natasha's transcript through and got a bunch of questions. I like that, don't like that. I don't know what she's talking about over here. But we're gonna have to come up with a percentage where we declare how much was created using AI. So I am genuinely concerned. I agree humans will overcome, but for now the SEO is scary.
As a market researcher, there's a market research side, believe it or not, has a fantastic code of conduct, which is because it's very tempting to use AI. So you've got 500 qualitative interviews, and I use it. You go through and annotate, but then you still have to check it. Someone who doesn't care will use it and will produce it out and won't go through. So there is a market research, very high level code of conduct. You've got to declare. You've got to. It's interesting that we haven't got there yet in other industries. Can I do the positive side on this? This is me reading up on it. I'm told that the future is PR and the future is podcast, not because of AI destroying it with slop, but because ultimately when it comes to affecting the way decisions are made within an LLM, AI really likes podcasts and really likes stories. Is that true, or is that just PR doing a really good job at hyping to me?
Well, yeah, PR does a very good job at hyping everything. So. Yeah, I think that certainly LLMs, and we've certainly done a lot of work on the LLMs ourselves, but only because we have been generating content as an agency about ourselves since 1998. I mean, we had a blog before it was called a blog, and it helped that I had a column in the Guardian, and I now comment, as you've rightly said, introduction. But it's all about generated content that is real, it's not AI driven, and the LLMs like it. And it does, you know, we've spent a lot of work ensuring certain questions about the level of work that we do are answered with our name, and it's been the biggest driver for new business.
So you've been strategically working on what you think.
Not me personally, but
Yeah.
a couple of people in the office who are better equipped than I am at the skills. But yeah, absolutely. But you can only do it if you got great content, it's valuable, and it's searchable, and it's, you know.
So just so I understand, why is it different from search? Why by tags and clicks? Why is podcasting PR, which is doing stories, why is that more beneficial?
What happens is every podcast will have a transcript automatically in the channels like Spotify or Apple, and LMMs decide they'll crawl that, they'll scrape data, and they'll say this is high authority, assuming it's by a human. Right? That was probably the initial code, assuming it's human. And so if a CEO wanted to go from obscurity to actually being seen as a thought leader in a sector, and they did a lot of podcasts in quick succession, they were really good at what they said in their subject, and they articulated well again and again similar kinds of sentences about their niche, they would suddenly pop right up if you were in Claude saying, hey, I'm interested in this subject, what do you think? And they'd go, well, blah, blah, the authority says this, because that's where one of the high places they're getting their data from. So I think, you know, people who are kind of languishing in this older thought process. I saw someone on David's WhatsApp mega chat actually talking about SEO yesterday, and I was like, where are they? But yeah, as more and more people use their AI of choice to find out about stuff, you have to realize that where they're getting their information from is all the places PR would usually push someone in earned spaces. So if you ignore that, you ignore that at your peril.
I'm conscious people have got to go to conferences and other stuff. Not that if we go to stay, because I'm really enjoying this, I've got a load myself. I've just got my final fun question. Okay. If you were to invent a new podcast for an area or an interest, it could be anything that you want. And short answer, what would it be? Mark, you can go first.
Be second. Mine works much more
Okay.
slowly.
What would it be, Miranda? You can say your own if you want. Doug?
Emily and I were planning a podcast called The Generational Gap. So Gen Z, and Gen X, and just looking at different things. What did you think of that show? Is it okay for me to say K on a text? I mean, all right, I got that.
I'd listen to that.
Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Circus stories, because circus performers are the most interesting people in the world, and their lifestyle is outside normal confines. There's a great place in Florida called Gibton. If no one's ever been to Gibton, they should. It was where all the winters, where many of the American circuses wintered, and there's a couple of senior homes there with some of the most fascinating people, including Lobster Boy, which is one of P.T. Barnum's latest.
Lobster Boy.
Yeah, Lobster Boy. We won't go why he's called Lobster Boy.
Should be sponsored by Shell.
Yeah, well, I don't think they'd sponsor it.
Or Claw, if you want to go into AI. Sorry, that's just me being contemporary. I'm going to close it up, just be conscious of people's time. Mark's got to go, but if anybody wants to chat around, we can have a copy after. Can I have a big round of applause, please, Mark?